Let me introduce myself. I'm Bob Flounders. We're going to talk about Penn State football for the next half an hour or so, like we always do on Tuesdays on the Blue White Breakdown. But just an announcement for Penn State fans regarding our Tuesday Blue White Breakdown. We're going to move it to Monday afternoons starting next week, Michigan week. The reason why is James Franklin, his Tuesday news conference is now going to be a Monday news conference. He announced it today. Mondays at noon, so why wait? Why wait a day, right? Johnny and I will be participating in the news conference, so it's going to be on. Look for it on Mondays instead of Tuesdays. Johnny, hey, what better way to start the week than to hear from James Franklin? I think it's great news all the way around. We heard from him today, though. Tuesday, it's Maryland week. I'll start with you. What jumped out to you about some of James's comments?
Well, Bob, the biggest news is the change in the news conference going to Monday. I love it.
It was a slow news conference.
The news is the change of the news. No, I mean, look, personally, I love it. When I was covering Pitt for a few years, that's when they did it, was on Monday, and it was great because you don't talk to players on Monday because it's their off day. So it kind of makes sense. And from James's end, I think the Ohio State game maybe precipitated this a little bit. You know, him having to wait until Tuesday to talk about a game that he would have rather not talked about, I think.
Yeah.
Just kind of get it out of the way. But now, getting into what he actually said in his Tuesday press conference, it was interesting. There's a lot of things to cover, a lot of injury updates that we didn't really get a whole lot of clarity on, other than Caden Wallace, who left the game against Indiana, and Drew Shelton came in to replace him at right tackle.
Yeah.
James said that Caden should be available to play this weekend against Maryland. He did not say the same for Harrison Wallace, the wide receiver who left in the first quarter, I believe it was, against Indiana, and reemerged from the locker room without his pads or helmet. He had his right arm in a sling, so that's not necessarily a great sign for not only Trey Wallace, who's a player who wants to be on the field, but also just the wide receiver room as a whole, which was a big talking point in this Tuesday press conference, as it's been, Bob, since training camp, this wide receiver room and really the lack of separation, the big plays, all that kind of stuff. But, the injury updates, and then him talking about Maryland, his familiarity with the Terps, and I wrote about that a little bit. James got his big break as a coach in the industry in his first stint with Maryland, and then came back for a second stint, was there a total of 8 years. He's worked with Mike Locksley before at Maryland, and Josh Gaddis is going to be in the booth calling plays for Maryland this year. Former Penn State assistant coach, wide receiver coach who recruited Jahan Dotson and KJ Hamler and coached a lot of these guys and helped Penn State win the 2016 non-national title. Penn State fans wish the Big Ten title. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see if there's any pregame interaction between those two.
Yeah, just circling back to Shelton, the way that James talked about that, I almost expect Drew to start. I don't know that it's going to be a big deal. He said Caden will be available, but he did say we're going to need him. I'm not sure what happened to Caden Wallace, but Drew came in and played a significant amount of time against Indiana. I thought he played well down the stretch last year. The more reps he got, the better he got. Johnny, I don't know how you feel. I think, it's about the present, but it's also about the future. This is a move I'm on board with if it's going to be more Drew Shelton, maybe less Caden Wallace. James has been one of Caden's biggest supporters as an offensive tackle. He actually was a starter dating back to the COVID year 2020. They moved Will Fries inside the guard to make room for him. He was a coveted recruit. I've seen enough of him to know that I don't know. I think he's found his ceiling. I don't know if he's going to get any better. If this Penn State offensive line is going to take a step forward in the final month in the bowl game, I think there are worse things than to see what Drew Shelton can do. He's a big part of their future, I believe, as well, along with Javen Williams, who we haven't seen yet, but I think they're high on them. That's one thing that struck me during the Tuesday news conference. Johnny, I don't know. I'm reading the tea leaves. I really, I don't know about this wide receiver room. James was asked a couple of times about it. A couple people disappeared even without Harrison Wallace against Indiana. James talked about it. He said it's just not the practice reps and what you do on the practice field, but it's also missed assignments. You guys don't actually know what the assignments are for the wideouts on a play, which tells me that they've missed some assignments, a lot of assignments. I think it sounds to me like there's a lack of trust maybe with some of these younger wideouts. It's not a good sign, especially if Trey Wallace is going to miss a lot of time. You said we've been talking about it for a long time. This has been an issue literally since the moment, the Rose Bowl concluded. He talked about it in spring. It hasn't gotten better. Keandre Lambert-Smith has had some good games, but there's been some games where he's been not good. And I just wonder, Maryland's defense, Johnny, is not terrible. I watched the Ohio State game. I know they've lost to Illinois and Northwestern since then, but I would imagine, even though Penn State usually handles them on the road, I think Maryland, if they have a spine at all, they're going to come to play on Saturday. And my question to you, Johnny, is if they're going to struggle to run the ball. If you're Maryland and you take Keandre Lambert-Smith out of the game, what is Penn State going to do on offense?
Yeah, and just to circle back really quick, Bob, we'll get to the receivers. I just one closing thought too on Caden and Drew. Drew definitely has a really bright future at tackle, and Penn State definitely wants to explore that more and help him get to his ceiling, which very well could be, and I'm sure Penn State hopes it will be higher than Caden Wallace. But I'll say this too, I think Caden has played well this year. I think he was the highest graded offensive player that Penn State had at Ohio State. Now that was kind of a low bar given what Penn State was able to put forth or not really put forth at Ohio State. But I think Caden's played well. The only hesitation, and I agree with you, that Drew will probably start, is we've heard James Franklin talk about offensive linemen before and say that, we expect him to play and everything. That player being J.B. Nelson before the Ohio State, the left guard, who exited the Northwestern game with an injury. James said before Ohio State that we expect both Venga-Ione and J.B. Nelson to play, and it was just Venga-Ione at left guard. So expect to see Drew Shelton this week, unless Caden's injury really is just not serious at all and he starts, but we'll see. Back to the wide receivers and a wide receiver room without Trey Wallace. You've got Keandre Lambert-Smith as your number one. And, we've talked about Keandre Lambert-Smith. He had a really nice play at the end of the Indiana game to catch that deep ball from Drew Aller, tightrope, the sideline and score a 57-yard touchdown, which won Penn State the game. So he's capable of those plays. But you look at what's behind him and without Trey, Amari Evans, Liam Clifford, and Caden Saunders did not play an offensive snap against Indiana. And I think that's telling because, I know that we talked about Liam Clifford and his rapport with Drew and there was all this talk earlier in the season when he was getting more reps about how he knows the offense and how his relationship, obviously with Sean being his brother, helps in that regard. We saw Amari Evans come on, late in spring camp and start the spring game as a third wide receiver. Caden Saunders catching a touchdown at Ohio State, the former blue chip recruit who was determined to come into his second season and flip the script, after not contributing at all last year. And to have none of those three even play a snap against Indiana, I think is kind of telling of the trust or lack thereof, really, that James Franklin, Marcus Hagans, Mike Yurcich has in this group, because it was Malik McClain, the Florida State transfer, when Trey went out. Dante Cephas got the start, but I think only had 2 catches for a handful of yards. And so if Trey isn't playing, and judging from his arm being in a sling, maybe not expected, maybe see more Theo Johnson, more involvement of Tyler Warren and the tight ends, just trying to work them in a little bit more. 2 guys who have been targets in the red zone, but aside from the pop play here or there, hasn't been featured as much in the offense, I don't think, as maybe that they should. And so I think that's the direction that Penn State might go in.
Yeah, and one of the reasons Penn State was able to be undefeated going into Ohio State is, the wideouts, other than Keandre, they weren't necessarily great the first half of the season, but Penn State's been able to play from ahead. And the minute they got behind against Ohio State, they really kind of got away from the running game, and the more they threw it, Johnny, the more it was pretty evident in the press box just what the deficiencies were in the wideout room. And if by chance Maryland gets up on these guys Saturday, it could be more of the same. They have to play with the lead, or they have to play. They are built, I think, to prosper in a close game, but eventually they need to get the lead. They need to play. They need to turn that pass rush loose. And the other thing is I really do think they have the kicking game with the punter, and also with Daquan Hardy as a punt returner. They have the kicking game now. They don't give up anything on kickoff returns because the kickoff guys have been good. They have the components in the kicking game to either neutralize the other team's kicking game or win that battle. So I really do believe James Franklin and assistants feel really good about 2/3, right, of the big three: offense, defense, and special teams. But I don't think it really matters, Johnny. If this team falls behind somebody in the second half, it's going to be troubled. I think that was my takeaway. Indiana could never get the lead, but they were close. And if Penn State falls behind and they have no one else to throw to but Keandre, they're going to struggle against everyone left on the schedule. Obviously, they're going to struggle against Michigan, but I'm talking about Maryland and even Rutgers.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. And a part of that too is, the lack of consistent running game that you want to see or had hoped to see or had expected to see after Nick and Katron had such stellar freshman seasons. The stats alone, I mean, you can just flip on the tape and see that, the line isn't getting the push, and those guys, when they hit the hole, sometimes they're a little too hesitant.
Yep.
The running game just isn't coming together as you would expect, but the stats bear that out too. I mean, the runs of 20 yards or more are not there. Even the runs of 10 yards or more are not there. They've been having to grind out yards, and really, James Franklin said last week that he thought that Penn State's offensive identity was getting into third and reasonable third and short, converting those. And it's like, maybe just avoid third down if at all possible, maybe have a 70-yard touchdown run, those just haven't happened. They just really haven't happened. Now, a part of that is the lack of passing game, because if defenses don't respect you through the air, what are they going to do? Load up against you on the run and make life more difficult on the offensive line of the blocking tight ends and Katron and Nick than it already is. But I really think there's a trickle-down effect from the lack of talent and separation at wide receiver and a first-year quarterback, and the approach and everything that Mike Yurcich has sought out really through 7-8 games now is to not turn the ball over and kind of play it a little safe. And I think that's affecting the running game. And so now you go on the road against a Maryland defense that is better against the run than I expected coming into this season. Yeah. And you just come off a performance in which you Nick and Katron rushed for about 130 yards against Indiana, which was allowing 175 rushing yards per game going into that. They had allowed 500-yard rushers this season, and Penn State wasn't able to accomplish that with either of their guys. And so I don't know. It's just a weird spot to be. Now, if you get a lead, if the defense, plays the field position battle and all those things that work out for you on the defensive side of the ball, that makes it easier on offense. I mean, you get some short drives and short fields to work with. But without Trey Wallace, and even he, it's not like he was a 800-yard guy or anything. It's just really kind of difficult times for this offense right now. They were booed a few times at Beaver Stadium against Indiana. And I don't necessarily blame the fans either, after some 3-and-outs against a defense that had been really bad against everyone else they had pretty much played against.
Yeah, Johnny, what I wanted to do with you is, since they're 2/3 of the way through the regular season, there's still a third to go. They did make some improvements the final month of last season. It did happen. I know the schedule dictated that. They had already cleared Michigan and Ohio State, but I did feel like there was improvement there, significant improvement. What I wanted to ask you is, between the two of us, I've been thinking about this since the Indiana game. I wanted to talk about maybe a list of 4 or 5 Lions that not only can, but need to step forward and raise their level of play in the month of November for Penn State to have a legit shot at 11 wins. And I don't say that lightly. I know it's a tall task, but this is a talented team. I certainly think they can get to 10. It would be surprising if they didn't. But I have about 4 or 5 guys I wanted to talk to you about, and you might agree with me. But I think some of these guys, they've had solid seasons, but I expected more. So I don't know how you feel about that, but there's a couple guys on my list that I think need to. If there's a 4th or 5th gear that they got, it's time. And I think there still is time. I think there's a couple players on offense, and I think there's a couple players on defense that really need to pick it up, because I think if they do play better, this team can take a step forward in the month of November.
Yeah, but rattle them off, Bob. I didn't know about this whole list thing, so I didn't prepare a list.
Yeah. No,
I
think the reason this isn't a surprise, but I do know. I kind of feel like, I mean, if I told you like an hour ago, I would imagine our list would look very comparable. And I think that's why I think it's easy to. I'm not trying to be Captain Obvious, but there's a couple players that I think that they've been good and they've flashed this year, right? But it has not been what I expected, and I would imagine you're gonna agree on some of these. Now, for me, the guy I want to start with, and I don't think he's had a bad year, but I do think after how I watched him play in 2022, I thought he would have maybe more of an impact in games. He actually played, I thought, very well the final 4 games of his true freshman season in 2021, where he was active. It's Kalen King for me. I'm not saying he's played bad, right? And I know that there are games where quarterbacks are not necessarily looking his way. The last 2 weeks, I think he's gotten some action, and I don't know. There were a couple plays where it's like, man, I'm surprised he gave that up. I feel like Kalen King, I think he had 16 pass breakups and 2 interceptions last year. I know they had Joey Porter, but I feel like when we talk about Penn State starting corners, and if you include the nickel corner, I've been more impressed with Johnny Dixon and even Daquan Hardy this year. And I wanted to get your feelings on where you think Kalen is right now.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you that I've been more impressed with the 2 guys you mentioned, Daquan and Johnny. From Johnny Dixon's standpoint, making plays as a corner blitzer. James Franklin mentioned that as, I think it was post game, that he feels like maybe Johnny Dixon isn't getting the love or the attention that maybe he deserves, and I think that's fair because everyone wants to talk about Kalen King, and I get that though too, because Kalen was a preseason All-American. He ranked 2nd in the country last year in pass breakups. Just chewing quarterbacks up and spitting them out. When they were targeting him and not Joey Porter Jr. Last season, and so Kalen comes in with that pedigree and that reputation. And a part of it earlier in the season was that he was not getting thrown at. He really wasn't, and then Marvin Harrison, gets a few on him, which again, we talked about this. Marvin Harrison Jr. is arguably the best player in college football. And he's going to get NFL corners for the next decade. So that I don't necessarily put that on Kalen, but I'll say this, like he hasn't necessarily flashed. Like he doesn't have an interception. Like he doesn't, he hasn't been making like wow plays when he is targeted and when he is getting those opportunities, whereas Johnny Dixon has. Daquan Hardy had, I think, 3 pass breakups at Ohio State and played really well. And so, yeah, I think the corner room is strong right now, but Kalen, by all accounts, and even looking at what some NFL draft experts and those people have said, like, there's a possibility that he's maybe not a guaranteed first round pick right now. And down the stretch here, he can reestablish himself as one of those guys. He's still a really good player. Like I'm not dumping on him by any means. He's a very good player. Yeah. But yeah, if I could use a few splash plays from him.
Yeah, and I do, and I'm saying I think it's possible, and I think it needs to happen, right? If it does happen, how does that change Penn State? How does it change this defense, which is already in my mind? I know they didn't have their best day against Indiana. In my mind, if you're gonna draw up a list of the top 5 defenses in the country, I think Penn State legitimate. I know they played UMass. I know they played Delaware. In my mind, I think they are legitly in the conversation to be a top 5 defense. And I think if Kalen, can be a little bit more active, kind of impose his skill set, especially against Maryland, against a quarterback that likes to throw the ball a lot. It doesn't take much, but I'm saying I think there is room for him to take another step. And I want to go to another guy, right? I know he's young, Abdul Carter. Okay, the linebacker who has been. I just took a quick look at his stats. He's made some splash plays this year. He is an incredible athlete, and he's just missed on a couple of other big plays. He had a big interception at Illinois this year. He had a play, I think, in coverage at Ohio State where it looked like McCord had somebody open inside the 10, and he made a leaping play to deflect the ball away. I don't think there's a lot of linebackers that can do that, and he's only a second-year player. But again, Johnny, he's a victim of his own talent at this point. He was so good last year, legit getting freshman All-American consideration. One of the best players on a Penn State defense that had a lot of them. And I'm just wondering where you are with him. I think he's been good this year, but I think he's got great in him. And to do that, though, there's got to have to be some more splash plays, maybe some more disruption. And I think he's capable of that, and I think Penn State needs it.
Yeah, but I mean, you said he's been good this year. I think at times he has not been good this year. Like I think, frankly, and he's a sophomore, so he's still young and he's still learning the position. And he's an uber talented player. And this is a guy who, I went to LaSalle High School last year when he started to pop at the Auburn game, to talk to his high school coach and his former teammates. And, he would, what they said about him, that they weren't surprised that he was making this splash as a true freshman. And then everyone else in the country saw it. He made 10 tackles for loss last year. He was all over the ball, sideline to sideline, in the backfield, just wreaking havoc on quarterbacks. And I just don't think we've seen that from him this season so far. Maybe sometimes he's thinking too much. Maybe he's getting lost with more responsibilities now. I don't know what it is, because I know that the tenor of the conversation around Abdul coming into the season was last year he was just kind of playing free and being a freshman and saying line up and go get the ball basically and go attack. And that he has more responsibility and he's learning the playbook and more and learning the ins and outs of the defense more this year. Perhaps that's slowing him down a bit. I don't know, because he hasn't been the same kind of impact player. You've seen it in flashes here and there. But there are games, this year, Bob, that we sit next to each other in the press box, and it's the third or fourth quarter, and it's like, where's Abdul Carter? Where are those impact plays that he made last year? So yeah, he's definitely a player who down the stretch, I wouldn't be surprised if he goes and has 3 tackles for loss at Maryland, and then goes and has a huge game against Michigan and does the same against Rutgers and Michigan State and finishes the year with 10 tackles for loss. That wouldn't surprise me at all, because he's that kind of player. We just haven't seen it, consistently enough this season.
Yeah, this I'm going to mention one more player on defense, and this one was a hard one for me because I think that he has been a player that you can see the athleticism, and you can see, if you want to look at his stats, he's had a few splash plays. He almost made the play against Ohio State. It got wiped out because Kalen King got called for holding on Marvin Harrison. That was a touchdown. I don't know that Penn State's definitely going to win that game, but it certainly changed the tenor, and it does a lot for Penn State's confidence. I wanted to get your thoughts on Curtis Jacobs. The only reason I'm mentioning him, he's leading the team in tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss. He's got a sack. He's got 4 quarterback hurries, a couple of fumble recoveries. I just think I think that I don't know if there is a better athlete on the Penn State team, and if there is, there's not very many of them. He's just a freakish athlete. He can run, he can hit, he can rush the passer, he can blitz, he can be a factor in coverage. I remember before the season, I think a lot of NFL teams very high on him as a 3-down linebacker, Johnny, in the NFL. When you look at his game, though, I think he's missed some tackles. And I just think I have a feeling this is a Maryland guy that I think he is going to have a huge impact against Maryland, and I think Penn State needs him to. There's literally nothing on the field that Curtis Jacobs can't do. He was a wideout in high school. I just have very high expectations for him, I guess is what I'm saying. And I don't know where you are on him, and I'm not. He's obviously been active, but I think there's been more plays there that he could have made.
Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned his talent and everything that he can do on the field. We've seen that. The coaches have seen that. His teammates have seen that. And NFL types have seen that. I go back to July. Matt Miller for ESPN, one of their NFL draft analysts and experts, did a story, talking to scouts and from the NFL and saying, who are kind of the under the radar players that no one's really talking about, before the season. And Curtis showed up in that story. And one of the scouts, or I think it was an AFC general manager, said that Jacobs might be a top 5 player in the class in the draft when it's all said and done. And, he will make an NFL team happy one day. Like he will be in the NFL and make that level because he's too talented not to. But like you said, there have been plays out there that he just hasn't made. And again, maybe that's his role within the structure of the defense. Maybe that's him again, kind of the same deal with Abdul, just not playing fast and free enough. We talk so much about Manny Diaz and what he does defensively, from a creative standpoint and putting these guys in position to succeed. And I think the defensive line has done a really good job. And perhaps it's just him not blitzing the linebackers enough for them to get those stats and get those kind of laurels and flowers and everything. But I do think Curtis is a great player. And I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up, with 3 tackles for loss or a couple sacks at Maryland. Remember, this is a team that Penn State beat last year 30-0. Yeah, because they had 7 sacks on Talia Tagovailoa, and this Maryland offensive line just gave up 6 sacks to Northwestern last week. So this is a game that kind of tees it up for these guys that we talked about: Abdul, Curtis, and maybe Kalen gets a pick or 2.
Yeah, I do want to just one bit of news. There was no update on Chop Robinson. You mentioned the 7 sacks last year. He had 2 of them. He's dying to play against Maryland. He left the Ohio State game. We're not doctors. It looked like he was very groggy getting up. They immediately put a towel over his head. He did not play against Indiana. I'm sure he would love to play Saturday in College Park. But I mean, that's a guy that I think if he would be on the field, that would really, I think, cause problems, I think, for Maryland's offensive line. But Johnny, we just don't know whether we'll see him or not. And I think Penn State's probably going to err on the side of caution. I just want to get to 2 more players with you. If you have any if you heard anything about Chop, please jump in. They're both on the offensive side. I was going to save it, but I think we got to talk about Nicholas Singleton one way or the other. If you would have told me at the start of the year, Johnny, that he would have 113 rushing attempts, I think that's what it is, through 8 games, and his long gain would be 20 yards, and there would just be one of them, 1 20-yard run, I would say you're out of your skull, and I think I probably would have remortgaged my house and said, I'll bet you any amount of money. I know they've struggled to create holes in the offensive line, but I cannot wrap my head around the fact that he's averaging 4.1 yards per carry, 113 attempts. He's on track for maybe 800 yards this season. Do you think we could see a different Singleton in the last 4 games of the regular season?
It's one of those where we talked earlier in the season in September. I remember before the Illinois game, and Jerzon Newton's a great player, so he had a hand in making sure that didn't happen. That being the Nick Singleton breakout game, because we saw against Ohio early last season, we saw against Auburn. By the end of the year, Nick had 7 runs of 40 yards or more. He has 1 run of 20 yards this season, and so earlier in the year, we were talking about, all right, when is that going to come? Like, when is it going to pop for him? And if it didn't happen against Indiana, like, I don't know when it will. I mean, it might happen against Maryland. Like, they're a better rush defense than Indiana, but they're not infallible. Rutgers is actually a good rush defense this year, but they're not infallible.
Yeah.
Maybe he has a big moment and just gets a crease against Michigan and takes it. But, we just haven't seen it this year. And so I don't know when it'll happen. I don't. And, I mentioned it earlier, about the lack of the pass game affecting the run game and defenses just loading up the box and daring Penn State to throw deep on them. That has an effect. But I do think, and we've talked about this in the press box a few times, where there's been a few opportunities for Nick, to break one. And it just seems like I don't know if it's timidness or just, him not seeing it, or, even when he just tries a cut, like he doesn't seem to have the same burst that he did last year. And maybe that's just oversimplifying it. And maybe that's us, we're not Jaywan Sider and seeing him practice every day. So that might be off base, but I don't know. Like, we haven't seen it from him so far, and he could definitely do with, a couple 100-yard games, because he hasn't had one yet this season.
Yeah. I would just say this, and it's a general statement, Johnny. I think Nicholas Singleton is at his best when he's running north-south. The minute he starts going east-west, I mean, he's a big dude. He is a muscular, powerful dude. I don't know. Once the deceleration happens, it's hard to accelerate again. I don't know. I'm not a physicist or a physicist, whatever it is. I'm not a physician either. But I just think that when he's north-south and he gets access to space, it's going to be tough to catch him. And I don't know. I could maybe count on my one hand how many times that's even been a possibility this year through 8 games. So we will see, but I just think it's worth talking about him. One more guy real quick before we conclude the blue-white breakdown. Just an uber talent that has been erratic. It's Theo Johnson. He had a nice touchdown catch against Indiana. It was a deep shot too. I thought that was encouraging, but my expectation for him this year, after the way he finished last year, was he was going to be an impact player, not only as a receiver, especially in the red zone, but he was going to help them as a blocker in the run game, much the way Brenton Strange did last year. And that got him drafted in the 2nd round. I thought that was a lot of people were smirking and said, why was that guy a 2nd round pick? Well, I think he did a lot of dirty work for that offense last year. And I think it's showing up in the run game and as a pass catcher. And I think he's helping Jacksonville this year. Your thoughts on Theo Johnson?
Yeah, I was expecting a lot more, just maybe not. I hate to put it all on him.
Yes,
because
fair.
I think a lot of it too is Mike Yursich and the play calling and having a first-year quarterback and all these different things that go into it. So, and the same deal with Nick Singleton too. Like, it's not just all on these players, but in terms of Theo's role within the offense, I did expect more. In my preseason predictions, I think I predicted that he would break Mike Gesicki's single-season Penn State record, for yardage by a tight end, and that's not going to happen. And that was based off of what Theo did down the stretch last season. He had, I believe it was at least one catch of 25 yards in 6 of Penn State's final 7 games.
Correct.
We saw the impact that he had in the Rose Bowl. And when I was talking to him in the tunnel of the Rose Bowl after the game and asked him, hey, do you think you're going to come back and all that? He said he hadn't fully made his decision yet, but he said he feels like he has more left in the tank and more to give Penn State. And I still believe that. I still think I think he believes that. I think he has more to give this offense. It's just a matter of getting him involved. And so if Harrison Wallace is out for an extended period of time and the trust, isn't really there in a wide receiver not named Keandre Lambert-Smith, I could see where, Theo Johnson would really factor in and become more than just a red zone threat and become more of a guy who you rely on to stretch the field and run up the seam and make a big play happen, because he's absolutely capable of it. We saw, the 34-yarder at Ohio State, and he's capable of that kind of play every single game. I think it's just a matter of if he gets his opportunity to do it.
Yeah, and I do think Drew's missed him a couple of times, too, on some plays that would have went for big gates. The guy's 260 pounds, and when he gets open in space, he is a matchup nightmare. He is a guy that I think can definitely take another step forward. And I wanted to talk about this now because there is still time. There's still some very meaningful games coming up for Penn State. The season is not over by any means, and they can change the narrative of the season, of their season. Everything can change in the month of November. It did, I thought, last year for this Penn State team. But it's time to get it in gear. This would be at Maryland on the road would be a great building block, I think, for this team, for some of those players, because they got Michigan coming in. I don't think Rutgers is going to be easy. There is still time for this Penn State team and those players, and they are. We talked about them, all 5 of them. They're gifted players, right? They're all going to play in the NFL. The question is, are we going to see them all take another step? I think in the final month, Johnny, and if they do, this team could really be a handful for everyone left on the schedule.
Absolutely. I mean, they got Maryland this weekend. They're going to need big performances from those players, from everyone.
Yep.
Maryland is a team that they're 5-3 right now. 3 consecutive losses to Ohio State, Illinois, and Northwestern, which that one was crazy to follow in the press box, Bob. I mean, Maryland was a 14-point or at least a 2-touchdown favorite against Northwestern. It feels like everyone is at least a 2-touchdown favorite against Northwestern. So that was a shocking result. But Abdul Carter, Curtis Jacobs, Kalen King, they have an opportunity this weekend against Taulia Tagovailoa, a quarterback who averages 37 attempts per game. That's the second most of any Power 5 quarterback this season. He's going to be dropping back and he's going to be throwing. And if you're Kalen, you're going to get your opportunities. And if you're Penn State and you get a lead, Abdul and Curtis are going to have opportunities to chase him down and make big plays. And Nick Singleton is going to have his chances. Theo will have his chances. This team has its chances coming up against Maryland, Michigan, Rutgers, and Michigan State. We'll see what they do with them.
All right, that's it for this edition of the Blue White Breakdown. Just remember, guys, next week, the rest of the season, James Franklin's news conferences will be on Monday. So Johnny and I will be talking about that on Monday and get the podcast up to you guys as quickly as possible.